There are days I wonder if I bit off more than I can chew, and where I sit around telling myself, did it really have to be 7 kingdoms? Why couldn't I have been, 5 kingdoms? 5 kingdoms would have been a lot. Very few people get up in the morning and say, oh, I'm evil. What evil can I do today? I'm going to cover the world with darkness, and my legions of evil will rule all.
Can you describe that sort of burning passion to create such a sophisticated and complex project of Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, and what it takes?
In some ways, it came out of my 10 years in Hollywood. And there was a real pattern to how my scripts were received in Hollywood. Every time I would turn in a first draft, the producers would say to me, George, this is great, we love it, but it's like 5 times our budget. Could you please cut these 107 characters down to 6? And this giant battle you have at the end with 100,000 people, could you make that a duel between the hero and the villain? I was a notorious budget buster. So they liked my work, but they always had to rein me in. So you do a lot of rewriting in Hollywood. But after doing that for 10 years, I was sick of doing that. I did it because it was my job, but I always preferred the first draft scripts, the one where I just threw in everything I could think of, the ones that were big and rich and expansive. So when in the mid-90s, I decided it was time for me to return to writing novels, writing prose, which had always been my first love, I said, well, this is great. I'm writing books again. I don't have to worry about a budget. I don't have to worry about a shooting schedule. I can make this just as big as my imagination. And I'm going to make this big. I'm going to make this epic. I'm going to have giant castles and battles and dragons and direwolves and a cast of hundreds or maybe thousands.
That's quite an imagination. I mean, we all have imaginations. That's off the charts.
Yeah, well, what can I say? It's something I've always had since I was a kid. I don't know where it comes from, but there it is, and I suppose it's my gift. I certainly relish it.
What's so different about your literary work is you started off with 9 different sort of characters and points of view, and then you expanded that to 35. How do you do that?
Yeah, there are days I wonder if I bit off more than I can chew, and where I sit around telling myself, did it really have to be 7 kingdoms? Why couldn't I have been, 5 kingdoms? 5 kingdoms would have been a lot. Yes, I use the point of view structure in the books is a very limited third-person point of view. So each chapter is seen from through the eyes of a particular point of view character, and you hear his thoughts or her thoughts, you see the things they see, you hear the things they hear. So unless one of my point of view characters is present at a particular event or conversation or battle, you can only hear about it secondhand, or you can only hear rumors of it that might be distorted. That's been the structure, really, of most of my writing. When I was a younger writer back in the 70s, I experimented with other things like omniscient point of view or first person. But I settled on this, which I think is most effective, this tight viewpoint structure, third person. And I think it's the best way to tell a story, because that's the way all of us perceive the story. We each look out through our own eyes. We can only hear what we're hearing, and we're not God to switch between them. I've never found the omniscient point of view persuasive. But with a big story, you need multiple points of view. I mean, I'm writing the equivalent of a medieval World War II. So, let's say I was doing a World War II novel. How do you write a novel about World War II? Whose viewpoint do you use? Do you use Hitler's point of view? Do you use Franklin Roosevelt's point of view? You can't tell the story of World War II from any single point of view. You need all of those points of view intercutting between them to assemble a mosaic that comes close to telling the entire story. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Except the difference being that in World War II, there have been literally tens of thousands of historians who have collected all those points of view. With King's Landing, it's just you.
Well,
how do you keep it straight? How do you remember and be able to adjust and reflect the points of view and the personalities in so many different ways?
I have glibly said in some interviews with increasing difficulty, but that's That's not far from the truth. It is big. I have charts, I have genealogies, I have maps, I have various files. I refresh myself. I'm aided by the fact that I think my brain is wired differently than a normal person's. I seem to use the brain synapses that normal people use for real people for my fictional characters. So I forget real people instantly. I will remember some guy who appeared briefly in a book that I wrote 12 years ago.
After spending that much time and that much attention to detail and working with the illustrators and the artists, what was the feeling then when you had to work with HBO and some of these things would either be simplified or, as you mentioned, the Iron Throne would be quite different, or the characters such as, I'm thinking, say, Peter Dinklage and Tyrion Lannister, and how that character compares to your books?
You know, I can describe a character. The reader's imagination always fills in the blanks, you know. So I can describe a character as incredibly handsome, and then you cast an actor for it, and the fans will start saying, "Oh, I thought he was much more handsome. It says in the book he's really handsome. This guy's only semi-handsome." But you know, some of that is subjective. You're never going to get a character who walks in who looks exactly what you described in the book, you know. And in the case of Tyrion, yes, Peter Dinklage is considerably better looking than Tyrion, who is described in the books repeatedly as quite ugly. He's also considerably taller. Tyrion is at least probably a foot shorter than Peter. But nonetheless, Peter is Tyrion. I mean, when David Benioff and Dan Weiss and I sat down for our first meeting about this process, and we were kicking around casting ideas, Peter Dinklage was the only name ever really considered for Tyrion. In fact, we never even auditioned anyone for the part.
Time magazine wrote of you, what really distinguishes Martin and what marks him as a major, what marks him as a major force for evolution in fantasy is his refusal to embrace a vision of the world as a struggle between good and evil. Do you agree?
I think the struggle between good and evil is central to fantasy, and indeed, in some ways, central to most fiction. It's certainly a worthy subject for fiction. But where I think I differ is I regard the struggle between good and evil as being waged within the individual human heart. It's not waged as fantasy would have it, where a character called the Dark Lord gathers all the evil people together and puts them in black clothing, and you know they're evil because they're really ugly, and all the good people are handsome and they wear white and they meet on a big battlefield. In the real world, good and evil are not that complex. Very few people get up in the morning and say, "Oh, I'm evil. What evil can I do today? I'm going to cover the world with darkness and my legions of evil will rule all." That's silly. You know, the greatest monsters of history, as we look back on them, thought they were the heroes of the story. You know, the villain is the hero of the other side, as sometimes said. That doesn't mean that it's all morally relative. That doesn't mean that all things are equally good and evil. I think there is good and there is evil in the world, but you know, it's sometimes a struggle to tell one from the other and to make the right choices. And all of us, I've always been attracted to great characters, maybe because that's what I see when I look around the real world, whether I read about it in history books or the news or just people I meet. I mean, all of us have it within ourselves to be heroes. All of us have it within ourselves to be villains. We've all done good things in our lives, and most of us have also done selfish things, cowardly things, things that we're ashamed of in later years. And to my mind, that's, I don't know, the glory of the human race. We're such wonderfully contradictory, mixed up creatures that we're endlessly fascinating to write about and read about.
Most of us have the potential to be anarchists, and it does seem in Game of Thrones that the anarchists are having the most fun.
Well, anarchy can thrive in a chaotic situation, sure. But we'll see who's having fun at the end.
Has your writing slowed down over the years?
Yeah, I think it actually has. Yeah, some of it is the sheer size of this that we spoke about earlier and how complex it is. There's a lot of checking and so forth. Some of it also may be the fact that I'm, of course, older than I was when I started this back in 1991. Some of it is the number of distractions. Success brings with it a certain amount of other obligations, you know, meetings and interviews and book tours and all of this stuff that is actually part of the job of being a writer that goes beyond the simple writing. And it takes up time and it distracts me from the books. But that doesn't mean it stopped me.
Do you have an ending already in mind?
I have and have had since the beginning, yeah. In broad strokes. You know, I don't have, I know the fates of all the major characters, but not necessarily the fates of many of the minor characters. And things do change sometimes as you approach the finish line. You come up with a better idea or a twist you hadn't thought of when you start. So I leave it open that I may change a few things when I get to the last book. But for the most part, yeah, I know how it's going to end.
One of the dramatic moments in the HBO series, and I think there was even a YouTube video of this, was people watching the Red Wedding and what happened. And the video of people watching that became viral. Were you surprised that that's the entry point that a lot of people made into both the series and to your work?
I was surprised by the videos. I was not surprised by the reaction to it because I'd been through a similar reaction when the book came out, A Storm of Swords, 13 years prior to it. I remember one tweet that someone posted the day after the Red Wedding episode aired that said, "Now you know why your nerdy friend was really depressed 13 years ago." And there was a certain amount of truth to that. I got letters at that time saying, you know, "I hate you, I threw your book across the room, I'm never going to read you again, I threw your book in the fire." That was a good one because it was like I threw your book in a fire and then 3 days later I went out and bought a new copy because I had to find out what happened next. But now we were talking about millions of people reacting to it. The Red Wedding was brutal in the book, but in some ways it was even more brutal on TV because David and Dan, the showrunners, did turn it up to 11 by adding the Talisa character and her unborn child, who don't exist in the book. Rob is married, but he has a different wife, and she's not pregnant, and he doesn't bring her to the wedding. He says, "No, it's going to be dangerous here," so he keeps her at River Run, where he knows she'll be safe. So by including her, they made the scene even more brutal, which I think increased the reaction to it even more. But the most astonishing thing was those videos, the fact that people who knew what was going to happen actually set up their wives and husbands and children and parents and brothers and sisters and friends and loved ones to capture their dismay and shock at the moment that wedding hit was something I never could have anticipated. I don't think anyone did, but it was pretty amazing.
And a great feeling.
Yeah. It's you know, when I write anyway, I want to engage my readers' emotions or my viewers' emotions. You don't want, you know, death is a big thing, you know. When we experience death in real life, it affects us, you know. When a spouse dies or your parents die, your brother dies, your dog gets run over, or God forbid, one of your children dies, rips your heart out. It affects you emotionally. If we're creating characters that we really care about, we should react in a similar way when they die in fiction or on television. It shouldn't be just, "Oh, okay, that character's dead. Let me go out and get a sandwich during a commercial." I mean, then you're not doing your job. I want to grab hold of my readers and make them cry and make them grieve and make them laugh as well and experience joy, experience the worlds on the page as if they were living them. That's the dream of me, at least, and I think of most writers. People being so consumed by their petty struggles for power within the Seven Kingdoms, within King's Landing, who's going to be king, who's going to be on the small council, who's going to determine the policies, that they're blind to the much greater and more dangerous threats that are happening far away on the periphery of their kingdoms. And of course, you can see that all through history. It's a common dynamic that takes place in history. You know, the Greek city-states before the birth of Christ, you know, fighting with each other, squabbling with each other, even as Philip of Macedon built up his armies to conquer them all. But you even see it in modern times, you know, the political struggles in the France under the Third Republic, while the Nazi threat is rising, but the French politicians would almost rather befriend the Nazis than each other. And maybe there are lessons in the modern day, too. Who knows? I mean, we have things going on in our world right now, like climate change that's, you know, ultimately a threat to the entire world, but people using it as a political football instead of, you know, you'd think everybody would get together. This is something that can wipe out possibly the human race. So I wanted to do an analog, not specifically to the modern day thing, but as a general thing with the structure of the book.